So thanks everyone for joining our webinar today. So this webinar is on student homes, focusing on energy, comfort and fuel poverty in relation to students. And it's part of the Student Switch Off webinar series. So some of you may be familiar with Student Switch Off running at your university, and there'll be a bit of an intro of Student Switch Off as part of the webinar. What we're going to cover today is understanding what energy poverty is, understanding students' unique vulnerability to energy poverty, going to help you to develop a student action list for reducing exposure to fuel poverty in the private rented sector, and to understand some recommendations for different groups and to support wider campaigns for positive change. I'll hand over to you, Emma. Shall I?
Yes, perfect. We'll just do a brief introduction now to SOS. So we are an educational charity, and we're also part of the NUS family, and we work with hundreds of organisations, including the ones that you're from today, to promote the needs of students. And so in 2019, in response to the climate emergency, NUS founded SOS UK, so we could go further and faster with the transformational sustainability work that we do. And so we aim to engage, inspire and empower students to lead on sustainability. And we also aim to embed sustainability in the informal education from early years to adult learning, and to make sustainability more inclusive. And so Student Switch Off is part of the way that we do that. And so as Rachel sort of said earlier, this workshop is part of Student Switch Off. And we've been running this programme for over 10 years now at universities across the UK. It's won awards because of how successfully it engages students in socially sustainable practices in student accommodations. And we've recently expanded this as well to cover students in private halls, in private accommodation as well. So it's really focused on saving energy, waste and water, and communicating why that's so important. So it's mainly run as a competition between halls, and the best hall wins a prize at the end of the year. And it's supported through volunteer training with students in those halls, regular engagement activities and prizes won throughout the year. And usually a lot of this will be done on campus, but we've adapted it this year, yeah, more than a year now, to be all available online for any student from participating universities. And we're actually currently running our week of action for this term, which includes a couple of competitions which you can enter online, an online masterclass about ethical finance, which you can take for free, and this webinar and another workshop as well on Friday, which is about sustainability in your career. So it's quite an interesting one to go to as well. And the best way to keep in touch about these events and Student Switch Off generally is to join our Facebook page and sign up to hear from us on our website, and we can put those links in the chat later on. And the campaign is really just a way to get involved with sustainability and take personal actions that make a real difference. And according to our research, after getting involved in Student Switch Off, 88% of students continue these positive, sustainable behaviours. So it really does make a big difference in the long run. And so now we have a poll, which I think Rachel is going to launch for us. So if you could just let us know if you are a student living in private rented accommodation that pays your own bills, or if you're a student living in private accommodation where your bills are included, or if you're a student in halls, or if you're a staff member supporting students in housing, or a staff member working in sustainability. They're the options that we've got for today.
I'm actually not able to launch the poll. I don't know if you are.
I will just double check. Yes, I can. I don't know why you do that. But I've just launched it now, so you can select which one applies to you. So if you could, yeah, just pop that in. It would just be helpful for us to know, and so yeah, slightly adapt what we're going to talk about today. Brilliant. Thank you so much for being so quick on the polling. I'll just share the results now so you can see as well. So brilliant. We've got a mixture of students and staff, like we said at the beginning, and it's great that we've got that mix there. A lot of staff supporting students in housing, which is really interesting. So thanks so much for coming, everyone. Great. And now we'll move on to sustainability. So Rachel, this is your part to explain.
Thank you. Are you able to? Yeah, great. So I want to talk a little bit about the wider context of sustainability, but also how it intersects with well-being and social justice. So sustainable development is a concept that you might be familiar with, and it's originally talked about through a report in 1987 using this definition that sustainable development is development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So increasingly, sustainability as a concept is being realized and recognized to include social justice and decolonizing and things like this that allow people today to live happy, healthy, and fulfilled lives, but also ensuring that the planet is able to sustain future generations to also have those happy, healthy, and fulfilled lives. So it is about recycling, reducing energy, reducing carbon emissions, but it really does have that social aspect built in, and people are really key to sustainability. So the Sustainable Development Goals are also a really helpful framework for realizing this. And the Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, were agreed by all UN member states in 2015 and seek to define the international agenda for sustainability for the next 15 years. So up until 2030, these goals are the roadmap for sustainability, I guess. And they help to demonstrate that breadth of sustainability and the interconnectivity between social, environmental, and economic factors. And the goals shouldn't be looked at in isolation as each individual goal, but a holistic approach working towards all 17 together. And you'll notice that we've got goal 7 is affordable and clean energy, and then goal 3 is good health and well-being. And these are the kind of issues that we'll be talking about today. So although they can't be looked at in isolation, different areas of sustainability will be contributing more towards certain goals than others. So sustainability is about creating positive change around environmental and social issues, as we've just addressed. And those most at risk from the effects of climate change are often those that have contributed the least to its causes, including marginalised groups. And improving student health and well-being is a core part of SOS UK's vision for a more just and sustainable society. So although we work for getting students to learn on and lead for sustainability, we also want students to live happy lives and to prioritise student well-being alongside student action for sustainability. So that's a bit of context for why we do this work, I suppose. But why is energy poverty an issue for students? Why do we even have to have this webinar today? So first, to define energy poverty a bit, it's a really widespread problem. So someone may be described as living in energy poverty or in fuel poverty if they're unable to afford to put their heating on to reach a comfortable temperature, or if they spend a really high share of their income on energy to maintain that level of warmth. And in other countries across Europe and the rest of the world, this can actually be around cooling. So to not be able to afford to put the air conditioning on to reach a comfortable temperature, which can be equally damaging for well-being. So it's really about comfort and being able to adequately heat or cool your home. So it can have significant negative impacts on health and well-being. So it's a really big problem across lots of different populations, including students. So energy poverty is often closely linked with environmental sustainability because properties with poor insulation that cost a lot of money to heat are also not very efficient, and they're likely to have really high carbon emissions as well due to an increase of fossil fuel use. So it's linked to social and environmental sustainability. And many students will be living in energy poverty, potentially without realizing it. And living in cold homes is just sometimes seen as a rite of passage for students, that, you know, people make jokes about it, that the houses are so cold and we have to sleep in scarves. But it's not a joke, it's a really serious issue, and it's a really difficult time for students living in some of these homes. So a bit of background, we've done lots of research in this through one of our projects called Saves 2. So I'll run through some of the reasons why students are affected by energy poverty. And there are quotes on the screen from our research. I won't read out all the quotes, but we can share the slides afterwards so you can have you can read back on some of the quotes. But one of the reasons is experience. So for many students living in a rented home during their time at university is their first experience renting and paying bills. So potentially unsure on their rights as tenants, unsure of energy costs and budgeting, unsure what to expect of how much it's going to cost. And often students don't have experience of programming heating, managing bills and the arrears that come with it, and communicating with landlords. So it's all really new experience, leaving students vulnerable to energy poverty. Sorry, I didn't realize the slide has changed. So students often live in shared households, so there's shared responsibilities and different abilities to pay. So there might be disagreements over heating and cooling levels, with some students potentially having a higher income and wanting to put the heating on more, causing stress for students who aren't able to contribute that additional energy cost. Managing bills as a household can be really challenging to manage. So getting flatmates to pay and the dynamics that causes amongst a group, maybe when one person has responsibility for paying and collecting money from other students, that can be a very difficult thing to manage. And an inefficiency when responsibilities aren't clear. So if we haven't established a kind of shared understanding of, in this household, you know, we aim to save energy and we try and keep the heating low, and if some people aren't clear on how to do that or why to do that, then it can lead to inefficiency and waste. So another issue that some of you will definitely be familiar with is there's a really high demand for student housing in university cities. So this affects affordability and competition for properties. So when there's high demand, with many students looking for housing months in advance, location being really important, size of property, things like that, all these things that students want in their home, it can drive up the competition. And this can lead to many students having little choice of properties and being rushed into making decisions when the competition is high, kind of just being desperate to sign that contract to get the house in the location that you want or with the right number of bedrooms. And low incomes result in cost of rent being the main factor. So when you are looking at properties, obviously how much it costs per month or per week is really, really important, and it has to be taken into account, which can also drive up that competition to get one in the right price bracket. And inexperience results in energy efficiency often being overlooked during that house hunting period. You're looking up where it is, how much it costs, you know, maybe what it looks like inside, maybe not necessarily around the energy efficiency at that early stage. So this has kind of led to why students are vulnerable, but there's difficulty in measuring student energy poverty, which is another challenge for decision makers and students themselves. So despite research showing that lots of students are vulnerable to this, and lots of students have low incomes and high costs, and that the student housing market is quite often of low quality older housing, we don't have good figures on the percentage of students in energy poverty. And this is due to lots of factors, but we rarely qualify for national assistance schemes, or students rarely qualify. Students are very transient population, so moving often short contracts, moving not living in the same place for a long time to be able to collect longitudinal data. And also difference in income within households means that a household may not be in energy poverty, but individuals within that house of 4 or 5 or 6 students could be experiencing it in very different ways. So all of this leads to students often not considered or included or helped with energy poverty because they aren't seen as a key group facing this. So we've done some research, and there's a lot of text on this screen, but I'll just go through some of the points. But over half of students claim that over 3/4 of their monthly income is spent on housing costs, and 45% report struggling to pay energy bills. And 38% of students say they felt uncomfortably cold in their accommodation, and 36% say their property is poorly insulated and drafty. So 2/3 of students have experienced condensation, drafts, and damp mold, and all of these can have real impacts on health, well-being, and it can also damage property. I know lots of students, when I was a student, lost items of clothing and lost other personal property because it got damaged by mold in their student home. Over 1/3 of students report an impact on mental health as a result. And women are more likely to live in poor quality accommodation, with more women reporting living in properties with damp, mold, and drafts. So the main reasons for not reporting issues within their accommodation to their landlord were that the issues were not worth reporting, or seemed to not be worth reporting, or they didn't think they would do anything about it. And there's also, with that really high competition, there's also a fear that if you kick up a fuss with your landlord, that you might not be able to stay in your property next year and you have to find a new house. So lots of really upsetting research, I think, on student experience, and just highlighting why we need to be doing something about it.
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you, Rachel. So we've kind of established why it's such a big issue for students with all of that data. The main thing now we're going to look at is what you can do to reduce your own exposure to this. So we're going to look at some house hunting tips, and then what to do when you're already in those houses, before looking at some other methods that you can try as well. So firstly, we have the energy performance certificate. So every property should have one, and A is the most efficient, down to G. And all rental houses now legally should be E or above. And if you know how your student house or your hall is performing, let us know in the chat now. You can just type if you know. I know mine is an E, which is not great, but it is legal technically. So yeah, but if you can put in if you know, that would be great. If you don't know yours, then you can actually find them online really easily. So they should be available to you as renters, but also you can find them online as well. So there's that, and yeah, they're really easy to access. But yeah, the higher it is towards the top, the better. So that's something to look out for. And in terms of heating and insulation, that has a really big impact as well, on both well-being and the bill costs. So it's really good to know what you're getting into when you're looking at the heating. So the best thing to do is to talk to the previous tenants if possible, because they're going to know the actual lived experience of those bills. And you can also ask the landlord what insulation is already in place, because insulation will have a big impact on the heating bills and how that works. So yeah, the best advice there is to speak with previous tenants and landlords as well about the insulation and heating. And often if the heating isn't sufficient, then there can be issues with damp and mold. So telltale signs will include that a smell when you're in the property, as well as condensation and visible mold on the walls and ceiling. So it's really hard to heat a damp property. So it's almost a sort of negative cycle, where if it gets really cold and it starts getting damp, it's then really hard to heat it up. And so it gets more cold and more damp. So it's really important to try to avoid these sorts of properties if possible. But if it's too late and you didn't realize, and you've already kind of got that property, then the best thing you can do is to ask your landlord to take action. If the damp is really bad and it's so bad it's causing damage to your health and well-being, or to the property, like Rachel was saying, it can do, then the landlord is actually required to take action. The charity Shelter has quite a bit more information on this, you can find online, and it also suggests sort of what you can do if your landlord doesn't get back to you or refuses to make any improvements. They've kind of got almost like a letter template you can just use to follow that up. So that can be really helpful. So yeah, in terms of smart meters, this is kind of a newer thing. So some energy companies actually require you to have a smart meter now. And there's a national rollout of smart meters, as they can be really helpful for identifying energy intense periods and ways you can be more energy efficient. So they can be really helpful. And the displays are usually quite simple and user friendly. But if you have any problems with them, you can always talk to your landlord or go straight to, if you pay the bills yourself, you can go straight to the energy supplier with any queries about them. So that's something that's, newer addition, but it can be really helpful, a good tool to use if you know how to read them. So definitely something to get used to if you do move into a property with one of these. You can also request them as well. If you don't have one already in your property, you could request one via your landlord or the energy supplier. And in terms of energy bills, it's really important that you know if bills are included in your rent or if you pay them separately yourself. And if you do pay them yourself, you do have the right to switch supplier. So you can run a quick comparison online, and there's lots of websites, but a good one is called Uswitch. And you can easily switch supplier in sort of 10 minutes or even less. So it sounds like a big kind of scary, intimidating thing, but it doesn't take too long at all. So I'd recommend doing that, and it can save you a lot of money in the long run if you switch to a different supplier that is cheaper. And so it's definitely worth checking that out when you move in. And in terms of reading energy bills, that can be really tricky as they all have slightly different layouts and use quite specific terms that can be sort of brand specific. And the Money Saving Expert has a really helpful resource to explain that. So I'd recommend checking them out to help read the energy bills that you receive, because they can be really complicated. So yeah, I'd recommend the Money Saving Expert for reading bills. And in terms of living in your new home, so we kind of looked at what to do beforehand. The best thing to do is it's all about developing good habits. So the main thing is to start now, even before you're moving in. So it would be great if you could all share some tips in the chat that you've already done to save energy at home. It can be anything really, there's no correct answer. But we have, a few examples on the screen now. So things like switching off lights and appliances when you're not using them. Not overfilling the kettle is quite a handy one. So you can always fill up your cup first with the water and then use that to measure out exactly how much water you'll need. And wearing extra layers, like we've kind of already discussed, is a classic for saving energy on heating. I'll just give you a couple of minutes to type in anything else, because I'm sure we've all got some ideas beyond these basic ones. Brilliant. So just give you a couple of minutes to type in the chat now. Well, these are some great ones. Yeah, thanks, Katie. So remember to using lids while cooking. Yeah, that's a good one. So keeping lids on saucepans can help save some energy there. And definitely drying clothes outside instead of using a tumble dryer. It is weather dependent, definitely, but definitely one to keep in mind. Oh, brilliant. Yeah, so I think it's a challenge, the showering one. So having slightly shorter showers or slightly cooler showers. Brilliant. And I think with all of these things, it's sort of a balance, isn't it, between energy saving, like we've said, but also having that good health and well-being. So making sure you're not infringing on your well-being by trying desperately to save as much energy as possible. Yeah, I do the same thing, Rachel. So yeah, making sure to boil water in a kettle before using it on the hob, that can be really helpful. Brilliant. A couple of other ones might be making sure to open your curtains in the day to allow some natural light and warmth in, and then closing them at sunset. So I love it. I'm really happy that it's daylight savings now, and it's there's a longer days, because yeah, I definitely appreciate that, and it's much better for health and well-being and energy saving as well, because you can heat up your home naturally, which is nice. Yeah, you've all said some really brilliant ideas for extra things to do. So brilliant. We'll move on now to some more recommendations. So Rachel, I think it's on to you.
Yeah, so these are recommendations for a variety of different groups. Depending on who you are, some of these might be relevant to you, and some of them are just really useful to know what we want the system to change to support students. So let's start with some recommendations for students, kind of continuing the tips that Emma was just sharing. So seek guidance and support. So your university or accommodation department, or potentially their SU, I think we've got some advice teams from students' unions here today, can often help with advice, especially if you have issues with your landlord or poor quality accommodation. I'd be really interested actually to hear, maybe at the end from some of the advice teams here today, what kind of support you offer and how students can access that. So no one should have to put up with a damp or mouldy house. So follow our top tips, choose the most efficient property that you can, understand and program your heating, consider your energy supplier, and put into place low cost measures such as using LED and efficient light bulbs, draft proofing, even with homemade draft proofing, and those energy saving tips. Be cautious of bill splitting companies. So these are companies that offer students one monthly bill to cover everything, and they usually charge their own energy tariffs, and we've seen examples of them charging really high rates, of double the rates. So be cautious of them before kind of just thinking, this is really convenient, I'm going to go with this. So research them carefully, because they often charge admin costs and just high energy costs. So don't put things off. If you're struggling with bills and arrears, so kind of the debt building up, lots and lots of unpaid bills, the best thing to do is to get in touch with energy companies directly to let them know, because it can feel really scary to kind of say, I can't pay my bill, but asking for support will help. And ask for support from your university or students' union, accommodation and welfare teams to help you through the process. Because energy companies don't want you to be building up lots of debt. They want to kind of help you fix the problem, and there's lots of other people that can help as well. So some recommendations for other stakeholders. So it's part of a wider issue. There's lots of things that students can do to reduce their risk and their exposure, but it's not all down to students, and it shouldn't be all down to students to bear the brunt of this problem. So here's what we're recommending for other groups. So we think that landlords should improve their building efficiencies, provide energy efficiency information openly before tenancy is finalised, and provide a guide with information to tenants on heating controls, on energy bills and energy efficiency related to the property. So this is what we'd like to see landlords do. And if you're in a position to, you can engage with your landlord, encouraging them to do this and to ask for this information if you haven't been given it. For policymakers and governments, we think they should deploy financial incentives for energy efficiency renovations to support landlords to make those renovations, and to incentivise minimum efficiency standards to make sure all properties are meeting energy efficiency standards, and include students as vulnerable groups in energy poverty reporting or support schemes, because they're often left out. And also to support emerging efficiency technologies to kind of help ensure that the grid is efficient and that renewable as well, to reduce carbon emissions at the same time. For energy companies, we want them to provide low-cost student tariffs, to train customer service advisors to adequately support vulnerable consumers like students and the unique positionality that students have, because it's a very different experience to other groups that may need customer advice and support. And the university and students' unions, we'd love to see approved landlord schemes kind of nationwide, to offer advice on bill management, budgeting and efficiency, and to offer hardship support for the most vulnerable students. These are recommendations for other groups to kind of tackle the problem at a systems level. So I'll hand back over to you, Emma.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you. So yeah, I thought we'd just touch on a couple of campaigns you can get involved with as well in terms of pushing those sort of systemic changes that we just discussed there. One of the main ones is called End Fuel Poverty Coalition. And this campaign actually targets local councils. So councils have a really vital role to play in ending fuel poverty. Councillors and prospective councillors can pledge to do all they can to end fuel poverty. And with the elections last week, now is a really great time to get in touch with your representatives about this, especially if they're new, because they might be more receptive to taking on anything that you send their way. So this End Fuel Poverty Coalition have a really simple form on their website that councillors can complete, and it literally takes them a minute. So time shouldn't be a barrier to taking this action. And everything about this campaign can be found online. If you just search for End Fuel Poverty Coalition, it's all there. It's really simple, and you can just send that link to your councillor, which you can find online, with just an ask that they support this, and you can personalize that with maybe what you've learned in this session, but also any sort of lived experience that you have as well. That'd be really powerful. So that's a really simple action that you could take in terms of campaigning on this issue. And I also included the National Union of Students, so NUS. They actually have a resource hub for campaigning on housing issues more generally, which is a great place to start if you want to work more locally on this issue. So a lot of this is kind of tailored for students' unions to have local campaigns on housing. And there are some really great examples of students working with their unions to make a difference locally. And your union may even already be working on this issue or have campaigned on it in the past. So it's really worth looking at some of these examples and the tools they've got on their website to build on what has already been started. So yeah, thanks for sharing that in the chat, Rachel. That's a really helpful resource that you can hopefully use.
So the next steps, what do we want to do next? First of all, we think it's a great opportunity for students to get more involved in Student Switch Off on their campuses. So you can follow us on social media. The links are at the end, and just kind of engage with what we're trying to do to engage students with energy and support positive energy behaviour change. And to get into good energy habits, whether you're living in halls now looking to move into the private rented sector, or if you're already in the private rented sector, kind of changing those habits to save money or to get into good habits ready to save money on your bills in the future. And obviously when you're house hunting, to take on the tips that we've just said, and when you first move in, kind of look back on these slides and follow those tips. And as Emma went over, support those national campaigns, maybe even start one in your university around local issues, and kind of raise the profile of energy poverty within student communities, and using your experience and kind of make it something that we don't just accept is something we just have to live through, and that it's a funny joke that students live in this energy poverty in cold homes and being uncomfortable, and make it something that we need to change at a national and international level. So some resources that we spoke about today are on the slide, and we'll send these through as well, so you can revisit them and find out a bit more if you're interested. So that concludes our final kind of the formal content of the webinar. So I think, should we stop recording now so people can feel more comfortable to ask questions? So for those watching the recording, thank you very much and goodbye.